Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a file that feels, well, it feels a little different than our usual tech discussions.
Yeah, it really does.
Because usually when we talk about AI on this show, we're looking at the tools, right?
Yeah.
The cool new image generators, the coding assistants, or, that immediate visceral fear of whether a robot is going to take a specific job next week.
Right. It's usually very immediate, very personal, and frankly, a little panicked.
Exactly. But today we are zooming way, way out. We're looking at the math of the economy itself. We're diving back into that fascinating source material titled AI Futures.
Authored by Jafar Humayun.
Yes, Jafar Humayun's serialized analytical framework. And today we are specifically looking at episode 15, which has this slightly ominous title, The Circulation Paradox.
It is a fascinating piece of work, and I think it's important to set the table here right at the start, just like we did last time we looked at his work. Humayun makes it very clear AI Futures is not a forecast.
Right, it's not a prediction.
Exactly. It isn't someone gazing into a crystal ball telling you exactly what the S&P 500 will do in 2028. It's a framework. It's about looking at the mechanics of how the machine works, or, in this case, how the machine might actually stop working.
Okay, let's unpack that, because we actually touched on this series briefly before. For anyone who missed our chat on the previous installment, which was episode 14, can you give us the 30-second recap? Because I feel like we need that context to even understand what a circulation paradox is.
Sure. So episode 14 was titled The Vanishing Point. And the core argument there was challenging this really common, comforting idea that AI is just another industrial revolution. You know, the old saying.
Yeah.
The bulldozer replaced the man with the shovel, but created a job for the driver.
Right. The classic argument that technology creates more jobs than it destroys. We've heard that a million times. The Luddites smashed the looms, but we got better clothes and more tailors. The car replaced the horse, but we got mechanics. Why is Humayun so convinced that AI is actually different?
It's a right question to ask. And Humayun argues that the difference lies in the cognitive gap. When the car replaced the horse didn't get a new job. But humans have always moved up the cognitive ladder. We went from muscle to management.
So we just manage the machines.
Yes, but the problem now is the machine has climbed the ladder faster than we can. AI isn't the bulldozer, it's the bulldozer, the driver, the factory that built the bulldozer, and the foreman who manages the site. All integrated. There is no parallel path for displaced roles.
Which brings us to today, episode 15, the circulation paradox. If the last analysis was about the jobs disappearing, this feels like the sequel where we find out what happens after the roles disappear.
Precisely. And the tone here is important for you listening. This isn't a scream-at-the-sky panic piece. It's not predicting a market crash tomorrow. It's systemic, grounded. It's about observing a chill.
A chill.
Yeah, it's about observing what happens when the velocity of money, how fast cash moves through hands, gets replaced by extraction. Capital inertia.
So let's get into the gears of this. The source material starts by describing the status quo. The machine that has been running for the last 100 years or so, Humayun calls it the bloodstream of the system. Walk us through that.
It's a cycle we all know, even if we don't think about it structurally. Labor leads to wages. Wages lead to spending. Spending creates demand. And demand creates jobs.
It's the circle of life, but for the economy. But let me push back for a second here. I work so I can eat. I work so I can pay my rent. Why do we need to look at this as some grand bloodstream? Isn't a job just a transaction between me and my boss?
Systemically, no. And this is the crucial point the source makes. We tend to think of a job as a survival tool for the individual. But systemically, that paycheck is the primary mechanism for circulation. Think about a single $100 bill in an engineer's pocket.
Okay, I'm picturing the bill.
That engineer goes to a local barber and pays for a haircut. The barber takes that same bill and pays the delivery driver for groceries. The driver uses it to buy lunch at a diner. The diner owner uses it to pay the local linen service. In a healthy economy, that single bill might participate in 10 different transactions in a week, moving value through the community.
So that $100 bill effectively created $1,000 worth of economic activity just by moving around.
Precisely. As long as that machine cycled money, going out to workers and coming back as consumption society held together, the dollar didn't just sit there, it was the bloodstream.
So the mission for this deep dive is to look at what happens when you pull a pin out of that cycle.
And that is where the source shifts to the modern disruption, the 99% evaporation.
This is where the numbers get really stark. The source compares the cost of a human versus the cost of AI. And we've all seen the headlines, but breaking it down like this hits different.
It does. Humayun analyzes the cost-to-consumption ratio. He uses a specific contrast, a $150,000 engineer salary versus a $2 AI token.
$2. That's literally cheaper than a cup of coffee.
Exactly. Now put your corporate CEO hat on for a second. If you can replace a $150,000 human payroll cost with a $2 capital expenditure, that looks like a massive win.
Oh, absolutely.
You are saving billions. Your margins are expanding beautifully. Shareholders are thrilled. On a spreadsheet, this is micro-efficiency at its absolute peak.
It looks like optimization, pure and simple. Efficiency is usually good, right? We want to make things cheaper and faster.
We do at the micro level. But here is where Humayun introduces the macro problem. He calls it participation evaporation. When you replace that human, you aren't just cutting a cost center. You are moving a node from the consumer web.
Removing a node from the consumer web. I like that phrasing. Because that $150,000 didn't just vanish into a black hole. It was active economic participation.
Exactly. Go back to our $100 bill example. That engineer was paying tuition. They were paying for a gym membership. They had a Netflix subscription. They went to the dentist for cleanings, took weekend trips.
Right.
When you swap them out for a $2 token, you save the money for the company, yes. But you have effectively deactivated a consumer. You haven't just fired someone. You've stopped them from participating in the demand side of the economy.
So it's not just optimizing a role, it's deleting a customer from the entire system.
That's the structural byproduct.
Right.
The source describes this as demand thinning. And there's a real structural irony there. The system is being optimized so efficiently that it eliminates the very participants who sustain it.
It's like a snake eating its own tail to save on grocery bills.
A very apt analogy. And this leads us to the core difference in economic models that the source outlines, the battle between velocity and inertia.
This was the part of the text that really made me stop and think. Because we always assume money is money. If a company saves $1 billion on payroll, that money still exists, right? It didn't burn up in an incinerator.
It exists, but it behaves completely differently. The source draws a stark distinction between the two economic models, the mobile model and the extraction model.
Help us visualize that. How are they different in practice?
Think of the mobile model as value flowing in a loop through diverse sectors. That's the old economy. Labor to local spending to business revenue and back to labor. It is defined by velocity. The health of the economy is measured by how fast the money moves and how many things it touches.
Okay, I'm with you. The loop and the extraction model.
In the extraction model, value flows upward and becomes motionless. It stops. That is defined by inertia.
So back to my obvious question. If the companies are saving billions by using the $2 tokens, where is the money?
It isn't vanishing. It is migrating upstream. The source is very specific about this. It sits motionless in corporate treasuries. It goes into stock buybacks. It goes into wealth portfolios. Or, crucially, it goes into infrastructure investments, specifically GPUs and data centers.
Hold on, can you explain the incentive structure there? Why is it rational to just store it?
It's pure capital allocation logic. If you're a company and labor is no longer required to produce your good, you don't spend money on labor. You prioritize storing value in assets or tech infrastructure. But the result is capital inertia. The flow of money through the community stops.
Right, and this is where we get that quote that I haven't been able to get out of my head since reading it. A server rack doesn't eat lunch.
It's such a powerful image, isn't it? A server rack doesn't eat lunch. A hedge fund doesn't buy groceries.
It's funny, but it's actually incredibly profound when you look at the macro picture.
It highlights the structural decoupling of production and consumption. A server rack requires power and cooling, yes, that's a capital expenditure. But it doesn't support the local deli. It doesn't pay rent. The company is hyper-efficient, but the demand side faces severe thinning.
So we have this money piling up at the top, basically stagnant in treasuries or data centers, while the broader community experiences reduced velocity.
Correct. And this creates a new phenomenon. Humayun explores this interconnectedness and calls it self-consuming growth.
Self-consuming growth. That sounds inherently contradictory. But let me play the skeptic again. I can see how this hurts the average worker. But surely the big B2B tech giants are fine, right? They sell software to other companies. They don't need me buying a coffee to survive.
That is the dangerous assumption the source tears down.
Yeah.
The idea that B2B is immune to the consumer is a mirage. Let's look at the feedback loop.
Okay.
Why does a company buy enterprise software? To help sell things to people or service people. If you replace the IT department with AI, who exactly is subscribing to that SaaS software? You don't need licenses for tokens.
Ooh, good
Yeah.
point. If the IT team is gone, the enterprise SaaS contract gets slashed.
Exactly. Or take the advertising ecosystem.
Yeah.
Companies like Google and Meta. That entire industry relies on companies paying to show ads to consumers.
Right.
But who funds the advertising ecosystem if the audience's discretionary spending narrows?
Yeah.
If people aren't taking weekend trips because they've experienced participation evaporation, why would an airline pay for ads?
So the B2B giants are ultimately standing on the shoulders of the B2C economy, whether they admit it or not.
They are. The source points out that high-efficiency AI adoption didn't just optimize away the cost of the company, it optimized away the TAM, the total addressable market, or the TNS, the total net spendable.
That is a wild way to think about it. You are optimizing your consumer base out of existence.
And this is what self-consuming growth means. It is a state where increasing production efficiency eventually erodes the very market capable of consuming that production. When there's nobody left to consume, production just becomes noise.
So what does this all mean for us? Because usually when we talk about economic disruption, people picture a crash. Wall Street panicking, tickers turning red.
The expert perspective here, and Humayun is very careful with his language, is that we need to stop looking for a crash. We have to redefine the crisis. This isn't a labor crisis. It is a demand crisis.
A demand crisis. So it's not that we can't make things, it's that we can't buy things.
Yes. Walk through the conditional economic logic with me. If margins expand by removing the consumer's income source, then the system faces a feedback loop break.
And usually markets recover, right? We have a recession, prices drop, businesses hire again, demand goes up.
Historically, yes.
Yeah.
But that recovery relies on the loop being intact. If the loop is severed, if the mechanism for distributing value, which is the paycheck, is permanently replaced by a $2 token, traditional market forces cannot jumpstart it. Recovery becomes structurally impossible through the old methods.
So it's not a boom and bust cycle, it's a broken mechanism.
Right, and this is where we apply the tone of the source. We shouldn't say the economy collapsed or crashed. The more accurate framing is that the economy has been out-optimized.
Out-optimized.
Out-optimized into a state of extraction. It creates a state of structural stagnation. The source calls it a silent leak. It's not a dramatic explosion, it's just reduced velocity. The water in the river gets lower, while the frozen reservoir at the top gets bigger.
And are we seeing this yet? I mean, are there measurable signals of this demand thinning?
The source notes that we are. The data is beginning to reflect this in slowing GDP growth and hollowed out middle classes in developed economies. The stock market might hit all-time highs because of capital inertia and margin expansion, but the systemic velocity is dropping.
The two metrics are decoupling. The company achieves micro-efficiency, but it triggers macro-stagnation.
Exactly. And that is the circulation paradox in a nutshell. We are creating incredible productive capacity while simultaneously dissolving the feedback loop that allows that capacity to be consumed.
Okay, this is a lot to process. It completely flips the script on how we talk about AI. We usually talk about skilling up or adapting, but this suggests the problem is fundamental to macroeconomic mechanics.
It forces us to look at the plumbing of the entire system.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into episode 15, what is the main takeaway you want our listener to walk away with? If they're thinking about this on their commute, what's the headline?
I think the most important thing to internalize is that we have moved from a system of circulation to a system of extraction. And that changes the rules of the game. It's not about waiting for new jobs to replace the old ones. It's about realizing that the demand side of the economy is experiencing structural decoupling.
And the final provocation for the listener, give us something to chew on that builds on this.
I'd leave you with this thought. This isn't a bubble bursting. A bubble bursts and then you rebuild. This is a feedback loop dissolving. It creates a state where growth consumes itself. So whether you were looking at corporate strategy or your own future, you have to ask, are we building for velocity or are we just accelerating inertia? Because eventually inertia stops moving entirely.
Wow. Growth consumes itself. That is definitely going to stick with me. It's not the sci-fi robot takeover we expected. It's a silent leak in the macro economy.
It's a heavy concept, but a vital one. We have to look at the math.
Absolutely. And listen, if you think this structural view is intense, wait until you hear what's next. We're going to keep following Humayun's AI futures framework. The next file on our desk is episode 16.
Ah, yes. The back office model breaks.
We're going global. The focus is when the work stopped coming to emerging economies. We're going to be talking specifically about places like India and what happens when that offshore pipeline just structurally dries up.
That is another massive piece of the puzzle. When the global arbitrage stops, The systemic implications are profound.
I can't wait to get into that one. But for today, we will leave you with the thought of the server rack that doesn't eat lunch.
Indeed.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay tuned. Stay curious.
Stay systemic.